What is sin? Hi, I'm Mike Mason. This is the St. Joe Society podcast. St. Joe Society is a Catholic lay apostolate devoted to help men order all things to Christ by growing strong in mind, body, and spirit. If you'd like to learn more about our work, you can check us out online at stjosephsociety.org. All right, gentlemen, this is the Intro to Spiritual Theology, episode 7. This week, we are going to discuss the nature of personal sin. Okay. We are in the second month of a 6-month series or 6-part series on the nature of the spiritual life. Now, the spiritual life is about the perfection of the human person. So last month, we looked at the nature and end of the human person because we have to know one, what is God perfecting and where is he taking us? This month, we're looking at the good and bad news. Okay. So the first week, we looked at the state of original justice. Last week, we looked at original sin. So, what did that do to that condition? This week, we'll look at personal sin. And then next week, we'll take a 30,000-foot view and some basic concepts in a Catholic notion of salvation. All right. So, let's review what we've talked about the last 2 weeks. And as before I launch into this, keep in mind, fellas, the notes I make for these, I write out pretty detailed notes for these. They're all on our website. So if you guys are listening along and you want to follow along with the notes in front of you, they're there for you. If something strikes your interest, you can go in there and check those out. And they're just PDF files on our website. So feel free to check those out. But all right, that being said, the difference between original justice and original sin. All right, let's talk about the relationship of man and God in the garden. Okay. Man and God have a harmonious relationship. God walks with man in the cool of the evening. After original sin, what do we get? Loss of sanctifying grace, no friendship with God. Man prefers lower goods to God. So our relation with God's messed up. What about man and his appetites? Okay. In the garden, we had integrity. So our appetites stayed under control so that Adam and Eve, could make good decisions. Now man's appetites attempt to rule his reason, and every one of us are very familiar with that dynamic, right? Our lower appetites, particularly for food, drink, and sex, want to mess with the rule of reason in the good life. How about man and his body? Man used to have peace with his body and with the world around him. After original sin, we get suffering and death. And then what about man and creation? Disharmony is introduced into the natural order. Okay. So we used to have peace with God and ourselves and the world around us. All of that's been thrown off by original sin. Now, original sin, when a person's born in a state of original sin, they're not in friendship with God. They need to be baptized, all the things we talked about last week. And we'll have more to say about that stuff in the future. But a person's not guilty of anything. Okay. We inherit the stain of original sin, but we didn't do it. Okay. What we're going to turn our attention to this week are the sins we actually commit, which are called personal sins. So we're going to define what a personal sin is. I'm just going to go straight out of the catechism here. We'll talk about different kinds of sin, and then more specifically lay out the basic conditions for mortal sin. So, all right, let's launch in. What is the Catechism of Catholic Church addresses personal sin in paragraphs 1846 through 1876? In paragraph 1849, it says this: sin is an offense against reason, truth, and right conscience. It's a failure in genuine love for God and neighbor caused by the perverse attachment to certain goods. Okay. So what does it mean here is that sin's an offense against reason and truth and right conscience. Our intellect, when we're thinking clearly, like when you think about sin, okay, it's in a lot of ways, it's really straightforward. Okay. Especially the basic like 10 commandments type level of reflection. Applying those can be a little complicated from time to time. But when it comes down to it, like reason can, for the most part, it's pretty clear on what needs to be done. Okay. When we sin, we are offending that clear eyed view. Okay. We are failing to love God and our neighbor, right? And we have this attachment to some goods at the expense of others. Okay. So that's going on sin. In paragraph 1850, it says this: sin is an offense against God. Now, a lot of people think when we sin, we're only offending ourselves or maybe, the moral order or our neighbor. No, no. All sin are sins against God. Okay. Against you and you alone have I sinned and done that which is evil in thy sight. Okay. All sins are against God because he's the source of all good. All right. And he's the one who's laid down the moral law for us. Okay. So when we sin, we're sinning against him. All right. So that's what personal sins are. Now, scriptures are very clear. We are not Protestants. Protestants believe all sins are mortal. We don't think that's true. Okay. We believe there are different kinds of sin. And there's a great many kinds of sin. If you go to Galatians chapter 5, 19 through 21, it discusses that. Okay. Sins are rightly evaluated according to their gravity. So not all sins are equal. Again, a lot of this is very common sense. So that the idea when Protestants, talk about the fact that all sins are mortal, on the face of it, that just seems absurd, and that's completely unbiblical. Okay, there is a distinction between mortal and venial sin that we find in Scripture in 1 John chapter 5, 16 through 17. Okay, and it's become a part of the tradition of the church to emphasize the distinction between mortal and venial sin. Now, what is this difference? Mortal sin destroys charity in the heart of man by a grave violation of God's law. In it, man turns away from God, who is his ultimate end and his beatitude, by preferring an inferior good. Okay, in a nutshell, what's a mortal sin? It's when you take an inferior good, a lower good, and you raise that above God. Okay, you put all in a manner, you put all your chips in that one bag. Now, this can happen in ways that many people might think are not a big deal. So you skip mass on Sunday. You skip. You're not sick. Your car didn't break down. You intentionally skip. Well, that's a mortal sin, right? We are morally obligated to go to mass on Sunday to fulfill that obligation. Well, that doesn't seem like I'm raising anything above God, right? I mean, geez, I'm just like not going to church. What's the big deal? Well, that not going to church, whether it's because you wanted to watch football or sleep in or mow your grass, like whatever reason you did, you place that above God as your ultimate priority. Okay. And so even something like just not going to church on Sunday is gravely evil because you're removing God. Because what is Sunday set aside for? The worship of our Almighty God. It's what God requests of us. The other 6 days a week, we can mow our grass and watch football and sleep in, just not on that seventh. Okay. So, what mortal sin is, it displaces God in our life and puts something else at the forefront. Okay. Venial sin, on the other hand, allows charity to subsist, sanctifying grace, even though it does offend or wound it. Venial sin weakens charity and it merits temporal punishment, whether that punishment is in this life or, say, in purgatory. But it doesn't have eternal consequences. So venial sins don't damn a person to hell, though there are consequences that are real and have to be dealt with. And we'll talk about that, especially when we get into the section on the Purgative Way, okay, which will be month 4. So now, deliberate and unrepented venial sin can never become mortal sin. So some people say, well, if I do a lot of venial sins, does it become mortal? Like, nope, these are two entirely different categories. But deliberate and unrepented venial sin, where you just kind of keep doing it, it disposes us little by little to big sins. Think of someone who has bad habits around the 6th and 9th commandment, right? Around adultery, or maybe they're not doing mortal sin, they're not doing things, but they just, they're talking to their secretary too much. They're, showing her attention that's not appropriate, or they're not developing the relationship with their wife. That over time can lead to a great fall. Same thing with alcohol, right? If somebody's always pressing the limits of the alcohol use, venial sin, you're just going to get drunk at some point. Okay. It's like that. Okay. So personal sin, offense against reason, offense against God. There's different kinds of sin and various gravity of sin, primarily mortal and venial sin. The last subject before us this week is, what for sin to be mortal, what 3 conditions need to be met. Okay. First condition, the sin has to be grave matter. Now, the most straightforward and easiest way to identify the grave matter is particularly emphasized by the 10 commandments. Okay. The gravity of sins can be more or less great. So even within the 10 commandments, the gravity, if you offend it, you commit mortal sin. Even within that mortal sin, there can be more or less great gravity of sins. Okay. But the 10 commandments is a good standard. Not every offense against the 10 commandments is a mortal sin, but that's a good standard to go with. When I go to confession, I use the 10 commandments to do my examination of conscience. Now, keep in mind, the 10 commandments are 10 broad categories. And you'll see this if you get a good examination of conscience, is that under each of the 10 commandments, there will be a bunch of other questions with it, because the 10 commandments are broad categories which other sins fall underneath. Same thing as when we talk about the virtues, right? The 4 cardinal virtues, there's lots of sub virtues underneath each one of those. Same idea with the 10 commandments, okay? So first thing, it's got to be grave matter. You got to actually do something that's gravely sinful. But the second, there's 2 more. The second, mortal sin requires full knowledge and complete consent, which means you have to have knowledge of what it is you're doing and freely choose it. If some strong man shoves a gun in your hand and forces you against your will to pull the trigger and kill someone, you didn't murder anyone. You are merely the instrument of the murder. The strong man's the one that did it. So that's the complete consent part. The full knowledge is you have to know what you're doing. Okay. Now, both of these concepts can get challenging. I did an intro to moral theology you can find on YouTube, Spotify, on our website, where I get into this in more depth. I spent a whole month on each one of these. So you guys can check that out about conscience and freedom and all that sort of stuff there and moral decision making. But in short, okay, knowledge, if it's completely lacking, you're off the hook. Okay. But ignorance can be intentional or unintentional. Okay. So intentional ignorance, okay, is in ignorance where like you make yourself ignorant because you don't inform yourself of things. Okay. Unintentional ignorance is when you don't do it. Okay. So there is a way in which you can make yourself ignorant. There's also a distinction between vincible and invincible ignorance. So vincible ignorance is ignorance you can overcome. And if that's the case, you're still held accountable, even though you're ignorant. Invincible ignorance, you can't. So, say my 2-year-old has invincible ignorance. She can't overcome being 2. All right. My 13-year-old on various topics does not have invincible ignorance. So when I ask him, did you know you weren't supposed to do that? He might say, no, I didn't know that. And he's not lying. But the question is, could he have figured it out easily? Did he intentionally make it so that he couldn't know the rule? You'll find teenagers do this, right? You guys probably know this. They'll not read the student handbook intentionally so that they can say, I didn't know that that was a rule. Well, that excuse does not work, right? Um, that's the idea here. So when you talk about full knowledge, you have to take some of those things in consideration. Again, check out our intro to moral theology if you're interested in that. You can look at our unit on conscience. And when it comes to complete consent, things that mess with our freedom, check out our unit on freedom as well. I think you guys will find that pretty interesting. But in short, what do you need for mortal sin? Grave matter, knowledge, consent, freely choosing to do it. Okay. If you're unsure from a practical perspective, if you've committed a mortal or venial sin, because that happens, sometimes it's difficult to tell the difference. So you go to confession, tell the priest, and just be honest with them. You can say, I'm not really sure if this is mortal. I know it's venial. I intention, all that good stuff. So, all right. Application, which we're almost out of time. Keep practicing the rule of life. Guys, stay on top of it. Second, daily examination of conscience. My family and I, we do this every night before we go to bed. It's the last thing we do. We get in the living room and we do the examination of conscience we have for you guys in our rule. And confession monthly, fellas. Put it on the calendar, schedule it, get in that confessional booth. All right. Okay. I think that's a good spot to stop. I hope you guys have a blessed week. Again, remember, all my notes are online. So if you guys want to consult those sources, have at it. So that being that, see you guys next week.